The gunshot that fractured the night sky also shattered Katherine Benson's world, sending her running through the dusty streets of Redemption Creek with nothing but the clothes on her back and the haunting memories she couldn't outrun. The year was 1878, and the Wyoming Territory offered little mercy to a woman alone, especially one with secrets carved as deep as the ravines that cut through the rugged landscape. Blood soaked through the sleeve of her dress as she staggered along the moonlit trail, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp autumn air. 3 days had passed since she'd fled the saloon, where she'd worked as a singer. 3 days since Wesley Harmon had cornered her in the dressing room and demanded what she would not give. When his hands had turned violent, Katherine had reached for the letter opener on the vanity. She hadn't meant to kill him, only to escape, but the gurgling sound that came from his throat as she pulled the blade free told her there would be no going back. Sheriff Harmon, Wesley's father, wouldn't care that it had been self-defense. To him, his son was blameless, and Katherine was just another saloon girl who'd gotten what was coming to her. So she ran, stealing a horse and riding until the poor beast collapsed beneath her. Since then, she'd been on foot, moving only at night, hiding during the day, and sleeping fitfully when exhaustion overcame her fear. Now, as she crested the hill overlooking Willow Springs, she could see lights twinkling in the distance. It was a small cattle town, one she prayed would offer sanctuary, if only for a night. Her arm throbbed where a bullet had grazed her during her escape, and fever was beginning to take hold. The last of her strength gave way as she reached the edge of town. Katherine collapsed beside a water trough, her vision blurring as she struggled to stay conscious. The sound of approaching footsteps sent panic coursing through her, but she couldn't move, couldn't run anymore. "Miss, are you all right?" A deep voice reached her through the haze of pain and exhaustion. Katherine tried to focus on the man kneeling beside her. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and his face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat. A cowboy, she realized distantly, noting the dust of the trail on his boots and the glint of spurs in the moonlight. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't turn me in." The man's expression shifted, concern etching itself across his features. "You're hurt," he said, gently examining her wounded arm. "I'm Isaac Morgan. I work at the Double Creek Ranch just outside of town. Let me help you." Katherine wanted to refuse, to pull away, to run again, but her body betrayed her. As consciousness slipped away, she felt strong arms lifting her, cradling her against a solid chest. Her last thought before darkness claimed her was that she'd never seen eyes so kind and a face so weathered. Isaac Morgan had seen his share of trouble in his 30 years, but the woman in his arms presented a different kind of challenge. She was clearly running from something or someone, and the wound on her arm looked like a gunshot graze. Under normal circumstances, he would have taken her straight to the town doctor, but her pleading words gave him pause. Instead, he carried her to his horse and carefully mounted, keeping her secure against his chest. The Double Creek Ranch was a few miles outside of town, and his small cabin on the property would offer privacy while he tended to her wounds. Whatever trouble followed this woman, Isaac decided he wouldn't be the one to deliver her into its hands, at least not before hearing her story. The ride to the ranch was quiet, interrupted only by the woman's occasional whimper as pain penetrated her unconscious state. Isaac kept a vigilant eye on the trail behind them, wary of pursuers. The moon hung full and bright above, illuminating their path and casting long shadows across the prairie. When they reached his cabin, Isaac dismounted with care, trying not to jostle his injured passenger. The small structure stood apart from the main ranch house, offering the privacy that came with his position as head wrangler. He shouldered open the door and laid the woman gently on his bed before lighting the oil lamp on the table. In the warm glow, he got his first clear look at her face. Despite the dirt and exhaustion, she was beautiful, with delicate features and dark hair that fell in tangled waves past her shoulders. She couldn't be more than 25, he guessed, though the shadows beneath her eyes spoke of hardships that had aged her beyond her years. Isaac retrieved his medical supplies from a trunk at the foot of the bed. He wasn't a doctor, but years of ranch work had taught him how to clean and dress wounds. As he cut away the blood-stained fabric from her arm, the woman stirred, her eyes flying open in panic. "Easy," he soothed, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "You're safe here. I'm just trying to help." Katherine struggled to sit up, her gaze darting frantically around the unfamiliar room. "Where am I? Who?" "Isaac Morgan," he reminded her gently. "You collapsed in town. I brought you to my cabin at the Double Creek Ranch. No one knows you're here." She relaxed slightly at his words, though wariness still clouded her eyes. "I'm Katherine," she offered after a moment, her voice rough with thirst. "Katherine Benson." Isaac nodded, pouring water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "Here," he said, helping her drink. "You've lost blood and you're feverish. That arm needs tending." Katherine regarded him suspiciously but allowed him to examine her wound. When he reached for the bottle of whiskey beside the bed, she flinched. "It's for cleaning," he explained. "This is going to hurt, Miss Benson." She straightened her shoulders, a hint of steel showing beneath the fear. "I'm no stranger to pain, Mr. Morgan." Isaac's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Isaac," he corrected, "and I reckon you're not. Ready?" Katherine nodded once, then bit her lip as he poured whiskey over the open wound. Her body went rigid, but she didn't cry out. Isaac worked quickly, cleaning the gash and binding it with strips of clean cloth. When he finished, sweat beaded her brow, but her gaze was clearer. "Thank you," she said quietly. Isaac stood, gathering the bloodied rags. "You need rest, and food, when you're up to it." He moved toward the door. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight." "Wait," Katherine called, struggling to keep her eyes open as exhaustion reclaimed her. "Why are you helping me?" Isaac paused, his hand on the door latch. "Everyone deserves a chance to tell their side of the story, Miss Benson. Get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning." As he stepped outside into the cool night air, Isaac wondered what he'd gotten himself into. The woman was clearly in serious trouble, and harboring her could put his own position at risk. But something in her eyes, a mixture of defiance and desperation, had stirred something protective in him, something he'd thought long buried beneath years of solitary living. In the barn, he settled on a pile of clean hay, his rifle beside him. Whatever or whoever Katherine Benson was running from, they'd have to come through him first. With that thought, he closed his eyes, though sleep remained elusive as he listened for any sound of approach in the night. Inside the cabin, Katherine surrendered to exhaustion, her dreams immediately filled with fragmented memories. Wesley's face contorted with rage, the sound of tearing fabric, the warm, sticky feel of blood on her hands. Sheriff Harmon's voice, promising to see her hang, the crack of gunfire as she fled, each image more vivid than the last, each one causing her to cry out in her sleep. Dawn was breaking when Isaac returned to the cabin, carrying fresh eggs and bread from the main house. He found Katherine thrashing on the bed, caught in the grip of a nightmare. Sweat dampened her brow as she muttered incoherent pleas. Her good arm raised as if warding off an attacker. "Miss Benson?" he called softly, setting down his provisions. When she didn't wake, he moved closer, careful not to startle her. "Katherine!" Her eyes snapped open, wild with fear, until recognition slowly dawned. "Isaac," she whispered, his name a talisman against the terrors of her dreams. "You were having a nightmare," he explained unnecessarily, offering her water. Katherine sat up, wincing as pain shot through her arm. "They never stop," she admitted, accepting the cup with trembling hands. "Every time I close my eyes, I see it all again." Isaac pulled a chair beside the bed, his expression compassionate but undemanding. "I brought breakfast," he said, nodding toward the table. "And clean clothes. They'll be too big, but they're better than what you're wearing." Katherine glanced down at her torn, blood-stained dress and nodded gratefully. "I can't stay long," she said. "It's not safe for you." "Who's after you, Katherine?" She looked away, weighing how much to tell him. This man had shown her nothing but kindness, but experience had taught her that kindness often came with expectations or betrayal. "Sheriff Harmon from Redemption Creek," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I killed his son." If Isaac was shocked by her confession, he didn't show it. "And why did you do that?" Katherine's fingers tightened around the cup. "Because he tried to force himself on me. I was a singer at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Wesley Harmon had been coming around for months, making advances. That night, he was drunk and wouldn't take no for an answer." Her voice faltered. "I just wanted him to stop. I grabbed the first thing I could reach, a letter opener. I didn't mean to kill him. Isaac's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. Self-defense, he said flatly. The sheriff won't see it that way. Wesley was his only son. And She trailed off. Just what? Katherine met his gaze directly, her chin lifting slightly. Just a saloon girl. No family, no standing. My word against the memory of the sheriff's son. Isaac stood, moving to the window to look out across the ranch. The sun was rising, painting the prairie gold and amber. Harmon's jurisdiction ends at the county line, he said thoughtfully. Willow Springs is in Granite County. Sheriff Miller's a fair man. You think I should turn myself in? Katherine asked incredulously. Isaac turned back to her. No, at least not yet. Harmon's got a reputation for bending the law to suit his purposes. We need to get you well first, then figure out a way to ensure you'll get a fair hearing. We? She echoed, surprise evident in her voice. Isaac's expression softened. Unless you'd rather face this alone? For the first time since she'd fled Redemption Creek, Katherine felt a glimmer of hope. No, she admitted quietly. I wouldn't. Then it's settled. You'll stay here until you're stronger. No one comes out this way much. My cabin's far enough from the main house to afford privacy, but close enough that I can keep my duties at the ranch. Katherine pushed back the blankets, attempting to stand. I can't let you risk your position for me. If anyone finds out, they won't, Isaac assured her, moving quickly to support her as she swayed on her feet. The ranch owner, Mr. Patterson, is away on business in Denver. The foreman, Hank Miller, is the sheriff's brother. He's a good man, but the fewer people who know about you, the better. Katherine leaned against him, suddenly aware of his closeness, of the strength in the arm that steadied her. Why are you doing this? She asked again, searching his face for hidden motives. Isaac's expression remained open, his blue eyes steady on hers. Because everyone deserves a chance at justice, Katherine, even saloon girls. There was no condescension in his voice, no judgment, only a simple statement of belief. Katherine found herself nodding, accepting his help to the table where breakfast waited. As they ate, Isaac outlined his plan. Katherine would stay hidden in his cabin while he made discreet inquiries about Sheriff Harmon's movements. If word reached Willow Springs that Harmon was searching for her, they'd need to decide their next move. For now, Isaac concluded, rest and heal. That arm won't be much use until the wound closes properly. Katherine agreed, though the prospect of remaining idle went against every instinct that had kept her alive these past days. After breakfast, Isaac left to attend to his duties, promising to return at midday with more food and news from town. Katherine changed into the clothes he'd provided, a soft flannel shirt and trousers held up by suspenders, then explored the small cabin. It was a simple space, one room with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove for cooking and warmth. A trunk at the foot of the bed held Isaac's spare clothes and personal belongings. A bookshelf against one wall surprised her, lined with well-worn volumes of poetry, history, and adventure tales. Katherine ran her fingers over the spines, wondering about the man who had taken such a risk for a stranger. The day passed slowly. Katherine dozed fitfully, still feverish from her wound. Each time she closed her eyes, the nightmares returned. Wesley's hands on her body, the sickening resistance as the letter opener pierced his chest, the hunt that followed. She would wake gasping, disoriented, half expecting to see Sheriff Harmon standing over her with a noose. True to his word, Isaac returned at midday, bringing a pot of stew and fresh bread. He checked her wound, frowning at the heat emanating from her skin. The fever's not breaking, he said, rewrapping her arm with clean bandages. If it gets worse, we might need to risk bringing a doctor. Katherine shook her head firmly. No doctors. I've survived worse. Isaac didn't press the issue, but his concern was evident as he watched her pick at the food he'd brought. I rode into town while you were resting, he said, settling into the chair opposite hers. No word of any search from Redemption Creek yet, but I heard talk of a killing at a saloon there. Details were sparse. Katherine's hand trembled slightly as she set down her spoon. How long before Sheriff Harmon tracks me here? Hard to say. The storm 2 nights ago would have washed away any tracks. If he doesn't know which direction you fled, it could buy us time. Isaac hesitated, then added, There's something else you should know. Wesley Harmon had a reputation that reached even here. He wasn't well liked. A bitter laugh escaped Catherine's lips. That doesn't surprise me, but it won't matter. His father wears the badge. Isaac reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers briefly. We'll figure this out. Catherine, I give you my word. The simple touch sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with fever. Catherine withdrew her hand, suddenly conscious of how vulnerable she was, not just physically, but emotionally. Isaac Morgan was unlike any man she'd encountered in her years of working saloons. There was no artifice in him, no hidden agenda she could detect. It made her uneasy, this unfamiliar territory of genuine kindness. After lunch, Isaac reluctantly returned to his duties, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts. The fever worsened as afternoon faded to evening, bringing with it chills that racked her body. By the time Isaac returned at dusk, she was delirious, mumbling incoherently as sweat soaked the bedding. Isaac cursed under his breath, recognizing the signs of infection. He built up the fire in the stove and set water to boil, then gathered the herbs and poultices he kept for treating injuries. As he worked to bring down Catherine's fever, he spoke to her continuously, his low voice a lifeline in the sea of delirium that threatened to pull her under. "Stay with me, Catherine," he murmured, bathing her face with cool water. "You're stronger than this. I know you are." Throughout the night, he tended her, changing poultices, coaxing water between her parched lips, holding her when nightmares made her cry out in terror. He'd known this woman less than 2 days, yet the thought of losing her filled him with a dread he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the injustice of her situation that stirred his protective instincts, or perhaps it was something deeper, a recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who had faced the world's harshness and refused to be broken by it. As dawn approached, Catherine's fever finally broke. Her breathing eased and her restless movements stilled. Isaac, exhausted from his vigil, slumped in the chair beside the bed, his hand still holding hers. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, but exhaustion claimed him, his head dropping forward onto his chest. Catherine woke first, her mind clear for the first time in what felt like days. The cabin was quiet save for the soft crackle of the dying fire and the steady breathing of the man beside her. Isaac's face in repose looked younger, the lines of worry smoothed away. His hand enveloped hers, warm and reassuring even in sleep. She studied him, taking in details she'd been too distracted to notice before. The faint scar that bisected one eyebrow, the streaks of silver at his temples that belied his youth, the strength in his jaw that spoke of determination rather than stubbornness. This man had sat watch over her through the night, guarding not just her body, but her dreams. The realization brought an unfamiliar tightness to her chest. In her 24 years, Catherine had learned to rely solely on herself, to distrust offers of help that inevitably came with strings attached. Yet here was Isaac Morgan, asking nothing in return for his protection. As if sensing her gaze, Isaac stirred, his eyes opening to meet hers. For a moment, neither spoke, something unspoken passing between them in the early morning light. "You're better," he said finally, his voice rough with sleep and relief. Catherine nodded, acutely aware that their hands remained joined. "Thanks to you." Isaac straightened, reluctantly releasing her hand as he stretched stiff muscles. "The fever broke around dawn. How's the pain?" "Manageable," she said, testing her arm with a careful movement. "You stayed all night." It wasn't a question, but Isaac answered anyway. "You were calling out in your sleep. Names, places, memories, I'm guessing. I thought—" He paused, suddenly uncertain. "I thought having someone near might help keep the nightmares at bay." Catherine's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "It did," she whispered, remembering fragments of comfort that had penetrated even her fevered dreams. A steady voice, a gentle touch, a promise of safety. Isaac stood, moving to stoke the fire and set water to boil for coffee. "I should head to the main house soon. The men will be gathering for breakfast and my absence would be noted." "Of course," Catherine agreed, pushing herself to a sitting position. "I've already kept you from your duties too long." Isaac turned, his expression serious. "Catherine, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She tensed, wariness returning. What is it? Are there others who might come looking for you? Not just the sheriff, but someone else who might have a claim on you? Understanding dawned. You mean a man? No, she said firmly. There's no one. I've been on my own since I was 16. I've worked in saloons because the pay was better than sewing or washing. But I've never... She faltered, a flush rising to her cheeks. I'm not what you might think. Isaac's gaze remained steady, no judgment in his eyes. I think you're a woman who's had to make hard choices to survive. That's all I need to know. The simple acceptance in his words threatened to undo the careful control Katherine had maintained for years. She looked away, blinking back unexpected tears. What happens now? Isaac poured coffee into 2 tin cups, considering his answer. Now you recover your strength. I'll continue to make inquiries, see what news comes from Redemption Creek. When you're well enough, we'll decide together what course to take. And if Sheriff Harmon tracks me here, then we'll face that challenge when it comes, Isaac said, his voice hardening slightly. But I promise you this. Katherine, you won't face him alone. For the next 3 days, Katherine's recovery progressed steadily. The infection cleared, and though her arm remained weak, she could move it without intense pain. Isaac divided his time between his duties at the ranch and the cabin, bringing food and news from town. So far, there had been no sign of pursuit from Redemption Creek, though rumors of the killing had spread throughout the territory. On the 4th day, Isaac returned from town earlier than expected, his expression grave. Katherine knew immediately that something had changed. What is it? She asked, setting aside the book she'd been reading. Isaac removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of agitation. Sheriff Harmon was in Willow Springs this morning, talking to Sheriff Miller. He's offering a reward for information about a murderess who fled Redemption Creek. Katherine's heart sank. Did he describe me? Dark-haired woman, mid-20s, possibly injured. He claims you seduced his son, then killed him in cold blood when he refused to pay what you demanded. Isaac's disgust was evident. Sheriff Miller seemed skeptical. But he's obligated to investigate any credible report of a fugitive. Katherine paced the small cabin, her mind racing. I need to leave, she said decisively. Tonight, under cover of darkness. I won't risk your position here, or worse. Isaac stepped in front of her, halting her movement. Running isn't the answer, Katherine. It will only make you look guilty. I am guilty, she exclaimed. I killed a man. The fact that he deserved it won't matter to most. It will matter to some, Isaac countered. To those whose opinion counts. Sheriff Miller is a fair man, and he's no friend to Harmon. If we can present your case properly, Katherine interrupted, anger flaring. There is no we in this, Isaac. This is my burden to bear. I won't drag you into it any further. Isaac's jaw set stubbornly. It's too late for that. I'm already involved. Why? Katherine demanded, frustration and fear making her voice sharp. Why risk everything for someone you barely know? Because I know what it's like to be hunted for something you didn't do wrong, Isaac said quietly, his words stopping her cold. 10 years ago, I was accused of rustling cattle from a powerful rancher in Montana. I was innocent, but evidence was planted, witnesses were paid off, and suddenly I was facing a hanging. Katherine stared at him, seeing for the first time the shadows behind his calm exterior. What happened? A stranger believed me. The local blacksmith hid me in his forge until he could gather evidence of my innocence. He risked everything for a young cowboy he barely knew, because he believed in justice more than he feared consequences. Isaac's gaze held hers. I swore I'd pay that debt forward if ever given the chance. The anger drained from Katherine, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. I don't want your death on my conscience, Isaac. Harmon won't stop until he finds me. Then we make sure he finds the truth instead, Isaac said firmly, but not tonight, and not with you running scared across unfamiliar territory. Tonight, we think and we plan. Katherine wanted to argue further, but the logic in his words was undeniable. Running had kept her alive so far, but it wasn't a long-term solution. Sooner or later, exhaustion or bad luck would catch up with her. One more night, she conceded reluctantly. But if there's any sign that Harmon is closing in, I'm gone. I won't have your blood on my hands. Isaac nodded, satisfied with the temporary compromise. I need to get back before I'm missed. Lock the door behind me and keep the rifle close. I'll return after supper." After he left, Katherine sat by the window, watching as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The imminent weather matched her mood, dark and threatening, with the promise of violence to come. She had never intended to involve anyone else in her troubles, especially not someone as decent as Isaac Morgan. The thought of him facing Sheriff Harmon's vengeance on her behalf filled her with dread. Yet beneath the fear and guilt lay something else, something Katherine was reluctant to examine too closely. In less than a week, this quiet, principled man had breached defenses she'd spent years building. His unwavering support, his willingness to believe her without question, his gentle care during her illness, all of it had awakened feelings she'd long thought buried beneath layers of hard-won survival. The storm broke as evening approached, rain lashing against the cabin's windows and thunder rolling across the plains. Katherine stoked the fire and lit the oil lamp, her thoughts turning to Isaac out in the elements. She hoped he'd had the sense to remain at the main house rather than venture back in such weather. A sharp knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Relief flooded through her as she moved to answer it, assuming Isaac had braved the storm after all. Her hand was on the latch when caution reasserted itself. Isaac always called out when he approached, knowing how easily startled she was. "Who's there?" she called, reaching for the rifle Isaac had left propped beside the door. "Open up in the name of the law," came the gruff response, followed by a harder pounding. "We know you're in there, Katherine Benson." Terror froze her in place as she recognized the voice, Sheriff Harmon, the man who had sworn to see her hang. How had he found her? Where was Isaac? The door shuddered under another blow. "Last chance before we break it down." Katherine's mind raced, calculating her options. The cabin had only one door and two small windows, neither large enough to provide escape. The rifle in her hands was loaded, but shooting a sheriff would only confirm her guilt in the eyes of the law. As the pounding continued, she made her decision. Stepping back from the door, she raised the rifle to her shoulder and called out, "I'm armed, Sheriff! I don't want to hurt anyone, but I will defend myself." There was a pause, then a different voice spoke younger, more measured. "Miss Benson, this is Sheriff Daniel Miller of Granite County. I'd like to speak with you, madam. No one's going to harm you." Katherine's finger trembled on the trigger. "Where's Isaac Morgan?" she demanded. "The Cowboy is being held at the main house," Sheriff Harmon barked. "Aiding and abetting a fugitive that's a hanging offense in this territory." Cold dread washed through her. Isaac was in danger because of her, just as she'd feared. "Let him go," she called, her voice cracking. "He didn't know what I'd done. I lied to him." "Miss Benson," Sheriff Miller's calm voice cut through again. "No charges have been filed against Mr. Morgan yet. We'd like to resolve this situation peacefully. Will you open the door so we can talk?" Katherine hesitated, her mind whirling. If she surrendered, perhaps she could convince them of Isaac's innocence. If she resisted, he would certainly be implicated. The choice was clear, though it filled her with terror. "I'm opening the door," she called, lowering the rifle. "Don't shoot." Slowly, she set the weapon aside and unlatched the door, stepping back as it swung open to reveal two men silhouetted against the stormy night. The taller one she recognized from Isaac's description as Sheriff Miller, lean and weathered, with a neatly trimmed mustache and observant eyes. Beside him stood Sheriff Harmon, a barrel-chested man with a florid face and cold, vengeful eyes that fixed on her with undisguised hatred. "Katherine Benson," Harmon said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "You're under arrest for the murder of Wesley Harmon." Before she could respond, Miller stepped between them, his hand raised in a calming gesture. "Let's all stay civil," he said firmly. "Miss Benson, I understand you've been injured. Are you able to ride to town for questioning? Or should we arrange a wagon?" The consideration in his tone surprised her, contrasting sharply with Harmon's naked hostility. "I can ride," she said, straightening her shoulders despite the fear coursing through her. "Good," Miller nodded, then turned to Harmon. "I'll escort Miss Benson to the jailhouse in Willow Springs. As we discussed, Sheriff, since the alleged crime occurred in your jurisdiction, but the arrest in mine, we'll hold her here until the circuit judge arrives next week." Harmon's face darkened. "This woman murdered my son. She belongs in my jail, under my authority." "The law is clear," Miller replied evenly. The territorial court has jurisdiction in disputed cases. He turned back to Katherine. Gather what you need, Miss Benson. We'll wait outside. As the two men stepped back onto the porch, Katherine quickly collected her few belongings. Her mind was focused on one thing only: Isaac. What had they done to him? Would he face charges because of her? When she emerged from the cabin, Sheriff Miller helped her onto a horse, securing her wrists with loose restraints that acknowledged her injured arm. The rain had slackened to a drizzle, but lightning still split the sky occasionally, illuminating the grim tableau. "The cowboy," she said quietly to Miller as they prepared to depart. "Is he all right?" Miller studied her face in the dim light. "Morgan's being questioned at the main house. His fate depends largely on what we learn about his involvement." Katherine swallowed hard. "He's innocent. He found me injured and offered shelter out of kindness. He didn't know what I'd done." "That's for the judge to decide," Miller replied, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't unsympathetic. The ride to town was tense and silent, with Harmon's glowering presence a constant reminder of what awaited her. Katherine's thoughts kept returning to Isaac, his gentle hands tending her wound, his steadfast belief in her innocence, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She had known from the start that her presence put him in danger, yet selfishly she had stayed, drawn to the safety and comfort he offered. Now he might pay the ultimate price for his kindness. In Willow Springs, Miller led them directly to the jailhouse, a solid stone building at the end of the main street. Inside, he guided Katherine to a cell at the back, separate from the main holding area, where two cowboys slept off what appeared to be excessive drinking. "You'll be safe here," Miller assured her, removing her restraints. "No one enters without my approval." Harmon pushed forward, his face contorted with barely contained rage. "I want 10 minutes alone with her," he demanded. "Fathered a murderer." Miller stepped between them, his hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. "That's not happening, Harmon. The prisoner remains under my protection until the circuit judge arrives. You're here as a courtesy." "Your courtesy won't matter when I bring witnesses from Redemption Creek to testify to her character," Harmon spat. "A saloon singer with a history of extracting money from men. My boy was just her latest target." Katherine gripped the bars of her cell, anger momentarily overriding fear. "Your son tried to force himself on me," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "I defended myself. Ask anyone at the Silver Dollar what kind of man Wesley Harmon really was." Harmon lunged toward the cell, only to be restrained by Miller. "You'll hang for this," he snarled. "I'll make sure of it, even if I have to burn down this town to do it." "That's enough," Miller said sharply, physically moving Harmon toward the door. "You're staying at the hotel tonight, Sheriff. I suggest you use the time to cool your head." After Harmon's reluctant departure, Miller returned to Katherine's cell, his expression thoughtful. "Is it true about his son?" Katherine met his gaze squarely. "Every word. Wesley Harmon had been making unwanted advances for months. That night, he cornered me in the dressing room. When I refused him, he became violent. I grabbed the only weapon at hand." Miller nodded slowly. "I never much liked Wesley Harmon," he admitted. "Had cause to arrest him once when he passed through here 2 years back. Roughed up a saloon girl pretty badly." He sighed. "Still, killing a man is serious business, self-defense or not." "What about Isaac?" Katherine asked, unable to keep the concern from her voice. "What will happen to him?" A knowing look crossed Miller's face. "Morgan claims he found you injured and took you in out of Christian charity, not knowing you were wanted. No proof to the contrary, so likely just a fine for not reporting your presence to the law." He studied her intently. "He seems mighty concerned about your welfare for someone who's just performing a Christian duty." Katherine looked away, unwilling to let him see the emotions his words stirred. "He's a good man. He doesn't deserve to be punished for showing kindness." Miller made a non-committal sound as he prepared to leave. "Get some rest, Miss Benson. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles." Alone in her cell, Katherine sank onto the narrow cot, the events of the day finally catching up with her. The nightmare she'd been fleeing had found her at last. In less than a week, she would face a judge and possibly a noose. The evidence against her was damning. She had killed Wesley Harmon, and she had fled. Only her word supported the claim of self-defense, and as Sheriff Harmon had pointed out, the word of a saloon singer carried little weight. Sleep eluded her as the night wore on, her mind replaying every moment of her time with Isaac. Would he hate her now for the trouble she'd brought him? Or worse, would he continue to stand by her, risking his own freedom, even his life? The sound of the jailhouse door opening sometime past midnight roused her from her troubled thoughts. Sheriff Miller entered, followed by a familiar figure that made Catherine's heart leap. "Isaac!" she breathed, rising quickly to her feet. Isaac Morgan looked tired but unharmed, his clothes damp from the rain, and his expression a mixture of relief and concern as his eyes found hers. "Katherine?" Miller unlocked the cell door. 10 minutes, he said gruffly. "I'll be outside. Don't make me regret this, Morgan." As the sheriff departed, Isaac stepped into the cell, his gaze sweeping over Katherine as if assuring himself she was unharmed. "Are you all right? Did Harmon—" "I'm fine," she assured him quickly. "Sheriff Miller has been decent, but what happened? I thought they were holding you at the ranch." Isaac's mouth twisted in a wry smile. "Questioned me for a couple hours, but Hank Miller vouched for my character. Said I was too soft-hearted for my own good, but not the type to harbor a killer knowingly." His expression sobered. "Katherine, I'm sorry. I never should have left you alone. If I'd been there when they came—" "You might be in the next cell or worse," she interrupted. "This isn't your fault, Isaac. I should have kept running. I knew staying would put you at risk." Isaac moved closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Listen to me. Sheriff Miller isn't convinced of your guilt. He knows Harmon's reputation and his son's. If we can find witnesses from the saloon willing to testify about Wesley's behavior that night—" "Witnesses?" Katherine gave a bitter laugh. "Who would risk crossing Sheriff Harmon to help me? Everyone at the Silver Dollar depends on his goodwill to stay in business." "Not everyone," Isaac said meaningfully. "I've been asking questions in town. There's a drummer who was passing through Redemption Creek the night Wesley died. He saw what happened, or at least part of it. He's here in Willow Springs now, delivering goods to the general store." Hope flared briefly in Katherine's chest, only to be extinguished by practicality. "One witness against the sheriff's word, it won't be enough." "It's a start," Isaac insisted. "And there's more. The saloon owner, Jenkins' word is, he's been looking to sell out and move east. With nothing left to lose, he might be willing to speak the truth." Katherine shook her head, unconvinced. "Even if he did, it would be his word against Harmon's. A saloon owner and a traveling salesman against the most powerful man in Redemption Creek? The odds aren't in our favor." Isaac reached through the bars, taking her hands in his. "Then we change the odds. Katherine, I'm not going to let you hang for defending yourself. I promise you that." The intensity in his voice made her look up, meeting his gaze. What she saw there took her breath away. Determination, yes, but also something deeper, something that mirrored the feelings she'd been trying to deny. "Why?" she whispered, echoing her question from days earlier. "Why risk everything for me?" Isaac's thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "Because in just a few days, you've become more important to me than my own safety. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for." He paused, a vulnerability entering his expression that she hadn't seen before. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Benson, and I'm not ready to let you go." The words hung between them, startling in their honesty. Katherine felt something crack inside her, a wall she'd built long ago to protect herself from precisely this kind of vulnerability. Tears sprang to her eyes, blurring her vision. "Isaac," she began, her voice unsteady. "You can't. We barely know each other, and I'm facing the gallows." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're brave and resilient. I know you've faced hardships that would break most people. I know you have nightmares that wake you screaming. Yet you face each day with dignity, and I know that when I'm with you, I feel more alive than I have in years." Before Katherine could respond, the door opened and Sheriff Miller reappeared. "Time's up, Morgan." Isaac squeezed her hands once more before releasing them. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised. "Hold on to hope, Katherine. This isn't over yet." As he left, Katherine remained standing at the bars, her mind reeling from his declaration. Love? The concept was almost foreign to her after years of guarding her heart against precisely such entanglements. Yet she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her at his words. or the fear that gripped her at the thought of him risking himself further on her behalf. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, her dreams a chaotic mixture of memories and fears. Wesley Harmon's face morphed into his father's, both promising retribution. She saw Isaac standing on the gallows in her place, his eyes filled with that same unshakable belief in her. Each time, she woke gasping, the cell's cold reality both a relief and a reminder of the precarious position she found herself in. Morning brought a subdued Sheriff Miller with breakfast, and the news that the circuit judge was expected in 3 days. Sheriff Harmon had already dispatched a deputy to Redemption Creek to gather witnesses against her. "What about witnesses for my defense?" Katherine asked, picking at the simple meal of beans and biscuits. Miller leaned against the opposite wall, regarding her thoughtfully. "Your cowboy's been busy. Found that drummer I mentioned, fellow named Perkins. Says he was at the Silver Dollar that night and saw Wesley follow you to the dressing room. Didn't see what happened inside, but heard you scream for help before the commotion broke out." Katherine's heart quickened. "He's willing to testify to that?" "Says he is. Morgan's also sent telegrams to the neighboring towns, looking for others who might have had run-ins with Wesley Harmon." Miller straightened, his expression serious. "I should warn you, though Harmon's not a man to let the law stand in his way when he's set on vengeance. He's making noise about taking you back to Redemption Creek by force if the judge doesn't rule his way." "Can he do that?" Katherine asked, fear threading through her voice. Miller's hand moved unconsciously to his sidearm. "Not while I'm sheriff of this county. But be prepared for things to get ugly before they get better." The next 2 days passed in a blur of anxiety and planning. Isaac visited twice daily, bringing news of his efforts to build her defense. The drummer, Perkins, had given a sworn statement about the events he'd witnessed. 2 other travelers had come forward with stories of Wesley Harmon's violent tendencies. Most promising of all, a telegram had arrived from the saloon owner, Jenkins, stating his intention to travel to Willow Springs to testify on Katherine's behalf. On the morning of the 3rd day, Isaac arrived at the jailhouse earlier than usual, his expression both hopeful and troubled. "Jenkins arrived late last night," he reported, keeping his voice low to avoid being overheard by the deputy on duty. "He's confirmed your account of Wesley's behavior that night and the weeks leading up to it. Says he was afraid to speak out before because of Harmon's influence, but he's selling the saloon and leaving the territory next month." Katherine felt a surge of hope. "That's good news, isn't it?" Isaac nodded, though his brow remained furrowed. "It is, but Harmon's been making threats around town, saying he'll see justice done one way or another. Sheriff Miller's deputized extra men to keep the peace when the judge arrives this afternoon." "You look exhausted," Katherine observed, noting the dark circles beneath his eyes. "Have you slept at all?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not much. Too busy trying to save a certain stubborn woman from the gallows." Despite everything, Katherine found herself returning his smile. "This stubborn woman appreciates your efforts, even if they're keeping you from your rest." Isaac's expression softened, his eyes holding hers. "It would be worth every sleepless night just to see you free." "Katherine." The naked honesty in his voice stirred something deep within her. Over the past days, she'd had ample time to examine her feelings for this man who'd risked everything for her. What had begun as gratitude had deepened into something more profound: admiration for his principles, warmth at his kindness, and yes, a yearning that went beyond simple attraction. "Isaac," she began hesitantly, "what you said before about your feelings." She paused, gathering her courage. "If by some miracle I walk out of here a free woman, would you—" The jailhouse door burst open, cutting off her words. Sheriff Miller strode in, his expression grave. "Judge Thornton's coach was ambushed 5 miles outside of town. He's fine. My deputies were escorting him, but it's clear someone wanted to prevent him from reaching Willow Springs." Isaac straightened, alarm evident in his posture. "Harmon?" Miller's mouth set in a grim line. "Can't prove it, but who else would benefit? He was making noise at the saloon last night about taking justice into his own hands." "What happens now?" Katherine asked, her momentary hope evaporating. "Judge should arrive within the hour, with extra guards. I've got men watching Harmon, but he's gathered some unsavory types around him, former deputies and friends from Redemption Creek." Miller turned to Isaac. "Morgan, I'd feel better if you stayed here until the hearing. If Harmon's planning something, you'd be a likely target. Isaac nodded his agreement, though his eyes remained on Katherine. I'm not going anywhere. True to Miller's prediction, Judge Thornton arrived an hour later, a stern-faced man with silver hair and keen eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The hearing was set for that afternoon in the town hall, with both sheriffs ordered to ensure security. Word spread quickly through Willow Springs, and by midday, the small town was tense with anticipation. At 2 o'clock, Sheriff Miller came to escort Katherine to the hearing. Isaac walked beside them, his presence a silent support that gave her strength. Outside, the streets were unusually crowded. Townsfolk and strangers alike gathered to witness the proceedings. The town hall had been arranged like a courtroom, with a table at the front for the judge and designated areas for the accused and witnesses. Sheriff Harmon sat at one side. Surrounded by hard-faced men, Katherine recognized from Redemption Creek. Their hostile stares followed her as Miller led her to her place. Judge Thornton called the hearing to order with a sharp rap of his gavel. "This is not a trial," he announced to the packed room, "but a preliminary hearing to determine if there is cause to hold the accused for trial on charges of murder. I will hear evidence from both sides, then make my ruling." Sheriff Harmon presented his case first, painting a damning picture of Katherine as a calculating seductress who had lured his son to his death. 3 men from Redemption Creek testified that Wesley had been a model citizen, respected and admired. One claimed to have overheard Katherine threatening Wesley when he refused her demands for money. Throughout their testimony, Katherine kept her gaze steady, though her hands trembled beneath the table. The lies were expected, but hearing them spoken aloud as truth still cut deeply. When it was her turn to present a defense, Jenkins, the saloon owner, took the stand first. His testimony directly contradicted Harmon's witnesses, describing Wesley as a troublesome patron who had harassed Katherine and other women repeatedly. Perkins, the drummer, followed, recounting what he had seen and heard the night of the killing. "I heard the lady cry out for help," he stated firmly, "and when I moved toward the dressing room, I saw Harmon's boy staggering out with blood on his shirt. She was behind him, clutching her torn dress closed, looking terrified, not vengeful." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Judge Thornton called for order, then invited Katherine to speak on her own behalf. Rising on legs that threatened to buckle, Katherine faced the room, her voice steadier than she felt. "I never wanted to harm Wesley Harmon," she began. "For months, he had been making unwelcome advances. That night, he followed me to the dressing room after my performance. When I refused him again, he became violent, tearing my dress and threatening worse." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. "I reached for the nearest object, a letter opener on the vanity. I only meant to scare him off, but when he lunged at me, the blade—" She faltered, the memory still vivid. "I never intended to kill him. I only wanted to protect myself." Judge Thornton studied her intently. "Why did you flee the scene, Miss Benson, if you believed yourself justified?" Katherine met his gaze directly. "Because I knew Sheriff Harmon would never accept that his son was at fault. As a woman alone, with no family or position, my word would mean nothing against the Harmon name." The judge nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Sheriff Miller. "Is there any physical evidence to support or contradict Miss Benson's account?" Miller stepped forward. "The coroner in Redemption Creek reported that Wesley Harmon died from a single wound to the chest, consistent with the letter opener described. The positioning suggests he was advancing on someone when struck. Miss Benson's dress, which she was still wearing when apprehended, shows signs of being forcibly torn." For the next hour, Judge Thornton questioned additional witnesses, including Isaac, who testified to finding Katherine injured and in distress. Throughout it all, Sheriff Harmon's expression darkened, his hand repeatedly straying to his sidearm until one of his companions placed a restraining hand on his arm. Finally, Judge Thornton called for closing statements. Harmon rose, his voice trembling with barely contained rage as he demanded justice for his son's murder. When it was the defense's turn, Isaac stood, summarizing the evidence of Wesley's character and the circumstances that had led to his death. "This is not a case of murder," he concluded, "but of a woman defending herself against assault. The law recognizes the right to self-defense, even when the unfortunate result is death. I ask the court to recognize that right for Katherine Benson." Judge Thornton retired to the sheriff's office to consider his ruling, leaving the packed hall in tense silence. Katherine sat rigidly, unable to look at either Isaac or Sheriff Harmon, whose hatred she could feel like a physical presence across the room. After what seemed an eternity, the judge returned. The room fell silent as he took his place at the front. "Having heard the testimony and examined the evidence," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "I find that Katherine Benson acted in self-defense when she caused the death of Wesley Harmon. The consistent accounts of his character and behavior, combined with the physical evidence, support Miss Benson's claim that she feared for her safety and virtue." A collective gasp rose from the spectators. Katherine felt lightheaded, scarcely able to believe what she was hearing. "Therefore," Judge Thornton continued, "I rule that no charges shall be brought against Katherine Benson in the matter of Wesley Harmon's death. She is free to go." The gavel fell with a crack that seemed to release something inside Katherine, a knot of fear and tension that had been her constant companion since the night of Wesley's death. She turned to Isaac, tears blurring her vision, and found him already moving toward her, his face alight with relief and joy. Before they could reach each other, a roar of rage cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Sheriff Harmon surged to his feet, his face contorted with fury as he drew his pistol. "No!" he shouted, leveling the weapon at Katherine. "If the law won't give me justice, I'll take it myself." Several things happened at once. Sheriff Miller drew his own weapon, shouting for Harmon to stand down. The crowd scattered, seeking cover from the imminent gunfire. And Isaac Morgan, without hesitation, threw himself in front of Katherine just as Harmon's finger tightened on the trigger. The shot rang out, deafening in the confined space. Isaac staggered, a bloom of red spreading across his shirt as he collapsed into Katherine's arms. More shots followed Miller and his deputies returning fire, but Katherine was aware only of Isaac's weight against her, of the warmth of his blood seeping through his shirt. "Isaac!" she cried, lowering him gently to the floor as chaos erupted around them. "No, please, no!" His eyes found hers, pain clouding their usual clarity. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a ragged whisper. "I'm fine," she assured him, pressing her hands against the wound in his shoulder. "You saved my life. Again." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Worth it?" he murmured before his eyes fluttered closed. The next hours passed in a blur of fear and desperate hope. The town doctor was summoned, pronouncing Isaac's wounds serious but not immediately life-threatening. The bullet had passed clean through his shoulder, missing vital organs but causing significant blood loss. Sheriff Harmon had not survived the exchange of gunfire. 2 of his men were wounded and under guard at the jailhouse. The others had fled, though Miller's deputies were in pursuit. Katherine refused to leave Isaac's side as he was transported to the doctor's home, where a room had been prepared for him. She sat beside his bed through the night, bathing his fevered brow and praying to a God she'd long since stopped believing in for the life of this man who had risked everything for her. Dawn was breaking when Isaac finally stirred, his eyes opening to find Katherine dozing in a chair beside his bed, her hand still clasping his. Despite the pain, he squeezed her fingers gently, rousing her from her light sleep. "You're still here?" he observed, his voice weak but steady. Katherine straightened, relief washing over her at the clarity in his gaze. "Where else would I be? You took a bullet for me, Isaac Morgan. The least I could do is make sure you didn't die from it." A soft laugh escaped him, followed by a wince as the movement jarred his injured shoulder. "Harmon? Dead," she said simply. "His men are either in custody or fled. It's over, Isaac. Really over." He studied her face, seeming to search for something beyond her words. "And what happens now? For you?" Katherine hesitated. With her name cleared, she was free to go wherever she wished. The thought should have filled her with relief, yet instead, she felt a strange reluctance, a pulling toward this place, toward this man. "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't thought beyond making sure you survived." Isaac's gaze held hers, an unspoken question in their depths. "You could stay," he suggested quietly. "Willow Springs could use a good singer. The Golden Eagle Saloon's owner mentioned as much yesterday." "Is that what you want?" Katherine asked, her heart beating faster. "For me to stay and sing in the saloon?" Isaac's free hand reached for hers, his touch warm and sure despite his weakened state. "What I want?" he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is to wake up every morning knowing you're near, to hear your voice, not just in song but in laughter and conversation, to have the chance to court you properly, Katherine Benson, if you'll allow it. The words she'd been afraid to acknowledge even to herself rose to her lips. I think I'd like that very much, she said softly. I've spent so long running and surviving that I'd almost forgotten how to live. But with you, Isaac, I remember. His smile then was worth every moment of fear and pain that had led to this place. Then stay, he said simply. Stay and let me show you that not all dreams need be haunted by the past. Katherine leaned forward, pressing her lips gently to his in a kiss that held the promise of all they might become to each other. I'll stay, she whispered against his mouth, for as long as you'll have me. That might be a very long time, Isaac warned, his eyes crinkling at the corners despite the pain of his wound. Katherine smiled, truly smiled, for what felt like the first time in years. I'm counting on it. Over the following weeks, as spring gave way to the warmth of early summer, Isaac's wound healed steadily. Katherine took a room at the boarding house in town and accepted the position at the Golden Eagle Saloon, where her clear, sweet voice quickly made her a favorite among the patrons. Each night after her performance, Isaac would be waiting to escort her back to the boarding house, their walks together growing longer as his strength returned. They spoke of many things during those walks, of their pasts, their hopes, the nightmares that still occasionally plagued Katherine's sleep. With each confidence shared, each memory examined in the safety of understanding, the shadows that had haunted her for so long began to recede. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the porch of the boarding house watching fireflies rise from the tall grass, Isaac took her hand in his. I've been thinking, he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. The ranch owner, Patterson, has offered me a parcel of land on the east side of his property payment for years of service, and a way to keep me on as head wrangler. It's good land, with a creek running through it and a view of the mountains. Katherine's heart quickened. That sounds wonderful, Isaac. I've been saving to build a house there, he continued, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Nothing fancy, mind you. Just a simple place to start. He paused, gathering courage. It would be a fine place to raise a family if a man had the right partner beside him. Katherine turned to face him, seeing the question in his eyes before he spoke it aloud. Isaac Morgan, she said softly, are you asking me something? He nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I am, though perhaps not very skillfully. Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. I love you, Katherine Benson, more than I thought possible when I found you collapsed beside that water trough 3 months ago. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? From the pouch he produced a delicate gold ring with a small pearl set between 2 tiny diamonds. It was my mother's, he explained. The only thing of hers I managed to keep through the years. Tears welled in Katherine's eyes as she gazed at the ring, then at the man offering it. This man who had saved her life, not once, but twice. Who had believed in her when no one else would. Who had taught her to trust again, to hope again, to love again. Yes, she whispered, her voice catching. Yes, I will marry you, Isaac Morgan. The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her. Isaac pulled her close, his kiss conveying all the promises words couldn't express. They were married 2 weeks later, in the small church at the edge of town. Sheriff Miller stood as witness, along with the saloon owner and several of Isaac's fellow ranch hands. Katherine wore a simple white dress sewn by the boarding house proprietress, who had taken a motherly interest in the young couple's romance. As they exchanged vows, Katherine looked into Isaac's eyes and saw, reflected there, all the possibilities of their future together. Gone was the haunted woman who had stumbled into Willow Springs fearing for her life. In her place stood a woman who had found not just safety, but belonging, not just freedom, but love. The cabin Isaac built on their land was indeed simple, but beautiful, with large windows that let in the morning light and a wide porch where they would sit in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Katherine planted a garden that flourished under her care, just as she flourished under Isaac's love. The nightmares didn't disappear entirely. There were still nights when Katherine would wake trembling, the echoes of past trauma pulling her from sleep with a cry. But no longer did she face those demons alone. Each time, Isaac would be there, his arms enfolding her, his voice steady in the darkness. "I've got you," he would whisper, holding her until the trembling subsided. "You're safe. I've got you." And she was safe, not just because he guarded her sleep, but because together they had built a life where the past no longer held power over the present, where dreams, once haunted by hurt, now held the promise of all their tomorrows. In the spring of their second year of marriage, their family grew with the birth of a daughter, whom they named Hope, a fitting tribute to what they had found in each other, as Katherine held her newborn child. With Isaac's arm around them both, she knew that the long, painful journey that had brought her to this place had been worth every step, for in the end, it had led her home.